Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. We do so by painting an accurate picture of that journey from the perspective of the justice-involved individual. Too often, our perceptions of those individuals are tainted by media-driven caricatures created to sell newspapers or movie tickets. This adds little to a healthy dialogue as to how to best address criminality and the reintegration process. This podcast avoids stereotypes and biases in favor of the lived experiences of those we can best learn from. Now, please, welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Thank you so much. Hello and welcome to episode 68 of the Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. Hey, before we get to today's fantastic guest, I wanted to announce to you all that Dr. Jared Brown of Concordia University in St. Paul has graciously agreed to rejoin the Criminologist podcast for a special three-part series. Recall Dr. Brown joined us back in episode 64 to share his diverse insights with us. Well, he has agreed to come back to tackle three topics over 3 episodes, those being ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, TIC, which stands for Trauma-Informed Care, and finally, Resilience and Self-Care Strategies for the Helping Professional. If you have not yet heard our interview with Dr. Jared Brown, I encourage you to go back and give it a listen. Again, that was episode 64. Or more to the point, if you have any questions regarding those 3 worthwhile topics that you feel I should ask Dr. Brown, please reach out to me at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com with any questions you may have of the good doctor. Dr. Brown is among some major guests I have scheduled for this fall, so trust me, you're going to want to keep an eye out for those scheduled appearances. I am so pleased to be sharing with you all today the story of another individual with lived experiences to share that we may all learn from. David Garlock is a successful returning citizen, reentry professional, and a criminal justice reform advocate. David is about to share his incredible story with us, so I don't want to drop any spoilers on you, but I can tell you he has earned a bachelor's degree from Eastern University and is now the Lancaster Program Director for New Person Ministries, a reentry program for sex offenders and other returning citizens. He's also a board member for the Lancaster County Reentry Management Organization and a member of the Pennsylvania Reentry Council, a statewide coalition of county reentry organizations. David enjoys educating the next generation of criminal justice professionals on rehabilitation and advocating in various spheres for an effective and equitable justice system. Please enjoy my chat with Mr. David Garlock, and I will see you all on the other side. Why don't we start off, David, by you telling us a little bit about yourself and, generally speaking, a little bit about your journey?
Yes. My journey really started when I was a child, and I grew up in a home with my mom and my dad and my brother and my sister. And if you had a picture dictionary and you looked up the word dysfunctional family, that's what you would have seen in my family. My dad was in Vietnam, and he came home with PTSD and became an alcoholic. And there was always fighting, between my mom and dad. And I was the one that would always be there to try to protect my mom and try to calm her down and help her. And one of the first instances where I saw the violence, from my dad was we were at our grandma's house and my dad grabbed a hacksaw blade and was chasing my mom and sister around, and it was then that we knew there was a lot wrong with our family. And I mean, in our family, my brother, my sister, and myself all were kicked out in different times. And so we all lived on the streets of Seattle. And really, one of the things that changed the whole trajectory of my brothers and my life is 2 years after my parents got divorced. They got divorced when I was 9, and really things changed right then around 10 and a half, 11. My brother was kicked out of the house in Seattle, and he was put in a receiving home, which was like a group home in Seattle. And in this home, there was a gentleman that had just been released from prison in South Carolina, and he moved to Washington, befriended the person running this home, and started molesting my brother. And after a little bit, this gentleman forced my brother to move in with him. And so threatening him, telling him that he'd kill him and our family if he ever told anybody. And a little bit after that, they went down to California where my mom and my stepdad were, and convinced them to come up, that they would have a better life in Washington. Now, this whole reason this was done was where this gentleman could have access to me. And the first time that I had seen my mom in 2 years was January 1st, 1991. I go over there. I'm thinking it's going to be a great time. I'm seeing my mom. I haven't seen her in 2 years. And I was a person who really loved my mom, and she was at that time my favorite parent, so I haven't seen her. So I was so excited, but that excitement changed, because it was that day that the sexual abuse began with me. And so for 8 years, this abuse went on, and as time went on, it wasn't just the sexual abuse anymore. It became physical. And towards the end, when I was 18, 19, that's when it really became a lot more physical. This gentleman had tried to kill my brother and me numerous times. And in this, we were thinking that, okay, we have to do something. If we don't do something, we're going to end up dead. And I didn't know we were really going to do something until the actual day that the murder happened, and we made an irrational decision. We took the gentleman's life. And around the same time, he had started molesting a 14-year-old boy too. So here we are being sexually, physically abused. Here's this other 14-year-old boy having his life and innocence taken away. And we took the gentleman's life, and it took him 4 months to find the body, and that was some of the hardest time of my life, because here I am with the thought process that I had taken somebody's life, and I couldn't tell anybody. So I went from one prison from the sexual abuse to another prison of having this thought process that I had taken somebody's life, and I couldn't tell anybody because if I told somebody, I would go to jail. And then finally, October 29th, 1999, I'm arrested. The police came and to my work, which was Shoney's, at 9 p.m. I was supposed to get off at 10, but I didn't get off that day. And so they took me in for questioning. They questioned me for about 4 hours, and I had partially confessed to what had happened. And they booked me in for a murder charge. So here I am, 20 years old, looking at a murder charge. And it's in Alabama, so I'm thinking I'm going to get the death penalty. I'm thinking I'm going to get life without parole. And worst case scenario is like my life is over. When my life is supposed to be beginning, it's actually ending right now, where I'm just thinking it's over with. And so that weekend was probably some of the hardest time of my life. I'm crying myself to sleep. I'm in the cell by myself. I feel so alone. I feel so dejected. Even though the murder was supposed to free us, it never freed us, and we took justice into our own hands. And at that moment, it's like, wow, I took this person's life, and now I'm having to deal with the same type of thing where my life could be potentially taken from me. So November 1st, 1999, it was a Monday. I was taken to the city jail for more questioning. So I was put in an interrogation room. And in this room, I sat there for 7 hours. And if you're in a room for 7 hours, you have a lot of time to think. I was thinking about the abuse. I was thinking about everything that happened to us. And I was thinking about the murder and how that was supposed to free us, but it didn't. And so I finally called the detective in, and I confessed to the crime. And it was this huge weight taken off of my shoulders. And afterwards, after they filmed everything, the detective was taking me back to the county jail. And I had handcuffs in front of me, and I'm sitting in the front seat, and we're heading back to the county jail. I'm looking outside as the houses pass by, and I'm like, am I going to get the death penalty? Am I going to get life without parole? And he turns to me and he says something that changed my life forever. He's like, do you believe in God? And I'm thinking, I'm not studying God. What's going to happen to me? But he was persistent about this, and he asked me like 3 or 4 more times. And I told him, yes, I believed in God. And he's like, you need to seek him now. And when I got to the county jail, I asked for a Bible, and they gave me a little New Testament Bible. And I started reading in Revelations and came to Revelations 3:20. That says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone opens the door and allows me to come in, I will come in and sup with him and he with me. And instantaneously, this peace and joy came over me. And it was incredible. I really wasn't worrying or feared about the death penalty or life without parole anymore. And like 2 weeks later, I was taken to my initial hearing. And that's when I was told I was just going to be charged with murder. So in Alabama, a murder charge carries 10 years to 99 to life with the possibility of parole. And so my brother and I, we had court-appointed lawyers that really didn't do anything for us. I would have rather been someplace where they had public defenders, where they are passionate about the work that they do, and not court-appointed lawyers, because these were defense attorneys that had to do a certain amount of these cases a year to keep practicing law. And so a lot of times they will put as little amount of effort and time into our cases. And it shows, because later on, when Brian Stevenson and Equal Justice Initiative started working with us, they found multiple reasons that they could have taken us back to court with an appeal if we had been in the time frame that Alabama allows you to appeal, which is another thing that is really messed up about Alabama and the system that they have. And so with our court-appointed lawyers, they told us the only thing that they were able to do was to get us a 25-year plea deal. And my brother and I, we were agreeing to everything, so we accepted it. And my lawyer is like, hey, if you have to do all 25 years, you'll still be a young 45 when you get out. I was like, wow, really? Thanks for telling me that, dude. It's like, thank you. I appreciate everything you did for me, which really wasn't anything, but okay. And in the county jail, before we were sentenced, I had told myself that I was going to do the time instead of letting the time do me. And that was about taking advantage of anything that was offered to me. So in the county jail, I was able to get my GED. And I was one of 10 people of the initial 11 people who were in the first cohort to take our GED classes in the Walker County Jail. And so it was amazing to begin to take advantage of my time, and it was about bettering myself, because I told myself if I had to do all 25 years, I wanted to be a better David Garlock when I got out than when I went in. And so that was my whole mindset. And so I went through a behavior modification program. I was able to get a drafting trade in the chapel. They offered a theology class. So I was able to get a master's of theology through an unaccredited school. So everything I was doing was about bettering myself, improving myself. And a lot more of that happened in 2008 when Brian Stevenson and Equal Justice Initiative began working with us. And they told us that they really couldn't do anything as far as our case, but that they wanted to help us as far as making parole. So they began working with us as far as our parole hearings. And finally, in 2013, I was able to make parole. And April 1st, 2013, I was released. And it was such a wonderful day, because before then, I had jobs where I worked outside. And it was one of those things where you would go outside and you would sense that type of freedom because you were outside of the gate, but then you had to go right back inside the gate and experience being locked back up again. But this day I was able to walk out and never have to go back, and so it was definitely a wonderful experience, and just such an incredible time. And so I went into EJI's post release education program. And that was amazing, just to have that support and help. And 9 months after I was out, I was able to get my parole transferred to Pennsylvania, where I was able to attend Eastern University, which is a Christian college outside of PA. I was able to graduate in 2017. I've been involved with criminal justice reform work around prison education, around individuals who have committed sexual offenses. And also right now I'm doing work around life without parole and geriatric parole.
Mm-hmm. Well, first off, thank you for sharing that story with us, David. That really takes a lot of courage to reshare that story with us. I appreciate that. You also illustrated there that just as there are multiple ways into a trajectory of criminality or criminal event, there's multiple pathways out. You showed us that, whether it was getting your GED, as you articulated, really taking advantage of your time, and then getting your master's degree and whatnot. Anything else on the journey of reintegration that you feel were some milestones that you hit on your trajectory, if you will?
I mean, the main thing is really my faith. That is what changed the whole trajectory of my life, and just having that relationship and just of all people, a detective was asking me if I believed in God, and just the different people that were placed in my life while I was incarcerated, the different individuals that were coming into the county jail with Bible studies. And then also the preachers and pastors that came into prison was definitely powerful. And at one prison, there was this group that came in from Fresh Anointing House of Worship in Montgomery, and I just connected with them a lot, and the work, and some of the people that came in were formerly incarcerated, and so here it is, such a powerful motivating factor for us to see these individuals that were formerly incarcerated coming back, speaking and preaching and sharing with us that second chances do happen, and that society isn't going to label you by the worst thing you've ever done. And that's the church that I started attending when I was released from prison. And what's so amazing about it was when I walked into the church, the Sunday after I was released, I had come up to one of the ushers, and I was like, "Hey, is anybody here from the prison ministry?" And so they looked around and they didn't see anybody from the men's prison ministry, but there's yeah, this lady goes into the women's facilities. Do you want me to introduce you? I'm like, sure. And so they brought me up and I talked to her. And so I just shared that, hey, I just got out of prison Monday. I wanted to come here because of the prison ministry that y'all have, and so I'm here. It's like, man, that's such an awesome story. Let me introduce you to Pastor Kimmy. So Pastor Kimmy is Bishop Kyle's wife. So I'm introduced to Pastor Kimmy, and I share my story about being locked up and out. She's like, man, that is so amazing. Let me go introduce you to Bishop Kyle. Now, one thing about meeting Bishop Kyle, you never go back there and you never talk to him before a service. That's like a no-no. That's never going to happen. And so when people at church had told me that, I'm like, well, that's favor right there. God opened the door for me. So I went back and I shared, and he's like, hey, do you mind if I share your story from the pulpit? I'm like, sure, go ahead. So I go back to my seat. I'm worshiping, and he comes up. He's like, hey, can David Garlock please come up here? I'm like, I did not sign up for that. And so I went up there and we talked some about the prison ministry and the impact it had. And what was really funny is he had asked me, what can we pray for? I'm like, a car and a job. He's like, okay, how about a wife? I'm like, one of those wouldn't be bad. And so the jobs came. But what was really incredible was the wife and the car came together. So when my wife and I got married on August 15th, 2015, her brother gave me a car. So I got the wife and the car in a joint deal. So it was a great wedding present. And we're getting ready to celebrate 6 years of marriage on the 15th.
Oh, congratulations. Congratulations. Loyal listeners of the show will know that I talk a lot about those so-called evidence-based practices that we utilize in corrections and criminology, things like motivational interviewing, accurate risk assessment, cognitive behavioral interventions. I believe in all those things, and I know those things work on some people some of the time. They have their certain effect sizes, as we say. But then I also talk to folks, and they'll say, Joe, those programs were great, but it was this one person I met on my journey, whether it was that detective you met or the bishop or whoever. So I never want to undersell the value and impact that a caring and compassionate person placed at the right place at the right time could really have on someone's life. It really is amazing. Let's take a moment to talk about, promote your great work you're doing with the Straight Ahead organization, if you would.
Yeah, so Straight Ahead, we're a C3 organization that has come out of the Abolitionist Law Center here in Pennsylvania. And the work that we're doing is to create parole eligibility for people with life without parole and to create a geriatric medical parole. So in the U.S., there's 55,000 people that have life without parole. In Pennsylvania, there's 5,447 people. So 1 out of 10 people that have life without parole are in Pennsylvania. And what's sad is the first state is Florida, and Florida has twice the prison population than Pennsylvania does. So, I mean, those disparities are crazy. Then we think about people that this group of geriatric individuals who are over 55. We have 10,600 people in that age range in Pennsylvania's prison. And it is so sad that we have so many people this age. And it's not because there's huge influx of crime waves of people that are 55 and older. It's because of lengthy sentences. It's because of life without parole. It's because of virtual life sentences. So virtual life sentences are sentences of typically 25 years or more. And what we're working on is we're working on these two bills because we know that these individuals age out of crime. And so when you think about different theories within the criminal justice mind frame, there's this theory called life course theory. And in it, they have a thing called early onset offending. And so what this talks about is people who have committed an offense at a young age, and there's something that happens in their life that changes it, and it changes their trajectory. And so a lot of times it could be prison, but inside prison, it could be they meet somebody and get married, or there's a loss of a loved one that really makes them to challenge their thinking and why they committed offenses and make them think that, okay, I need to change my ways. I don't want to go commit offenses again. And the recidivism rates for those who have committed violent offenses, or what society considers violent offenses, is so low. I mean, people who have committed murder, people who have committed sexual offenses have the lowest recidivism rates out there. But society and the media wants to portray this population as monsters, as boogeymen. But I'm here to say that this population is not that. Yes, there might have been a violent offense, but we're not violent offenders.
Yeah, that's one of the great ironies. I know I do a lot of work with, I mentioned risk assessment, and one of the big misconceptions, and you just touched on it, David, was that this tendency of not just practitioners, but even policymakers to equate offense severity with risk of reoffending. And there's no correlation there. As you said, even from the empirical data, we know that, for example, murderers and sex offenders as a class of offenders have one of the lowest reoffending rates. It's just people struggle with the impact of the crime versus they try to think, well, they're going to have these serial murderers and whatnot. And like I said, you could look at the other, flip that around and look at shoplifters. Well, shoplifters reoffend all the time, or property offenders. But yeah, and again, we see, even policymakers making that mistake of thinking, I'm going to have to link the severity of this crime with the risk of reoffending. And there's just no linkage there. Yeah. You mentioned earlier some folks with lived experience that kind of came back and talked to and mentored you. And I know there's emerging research on showing this, that is actually part of the process of this sort of giving back. I know you also speak at universities, and you've appeared on various criminal justice reform panels. Is there a therapeutic sense to that, David, that again, that's helping with your process, if you will, that sort of giving back, if you would?
Yeah, and a lot of it comes from 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4. It says, God is the God of comforts and tender mercies, and he comforts us so we can comfort others, And the healing that I've gone through has been for me, but now I'm able to take that and to share it with others and to help them. And when I'm speaking in universities, I do it for a couple different reasons, One is to help educate, because a lot of the people that I'm speaking to are going to be the next lawyers, going to be the next judges, going to be the next probation parole officers. So I want them to really see what somebody who has been incarcerated looks like. It's about breaking down stereotypes. It's about breaking down stigmas, and it's about changing the narrative. And a lot of times there were times where these individuals were baffled that I was standing in front of them and that I had committed the offense I did, because I didn't fit their stereotype that they were expecting. And so that's what I really love to do. I love to break those stereotypes. Another thing is, I know that in sharing my story, so many people who have been victims of sexual abuse are able to feel empowered because they see how open I am about talking about what happened to me. And I talk about trauma in this way, where there's two different people, say on our arms, we have a scar on one arm and we have a wound with a scab on the other. So the person that has been healed is the scar. The person that has not really dealt with their issues is the scab. So the person who has a scab, if you lightly hit that scab, it's going to fall off and start bleeding. So that pain, that hurt, that heartache, everything's going to be there initially, and they have to deal with that on a constant basis. Now, the person that has a score, they're able to look at that score and say, okay, I was harmed. I had this huge cut, but it's healed now. If I hit it, nothing's going to happen. But I have that reminder of what happened, and I can show it to other people so they can get that healing too. And so that's how I look at it, and I'm able to share my experiences. I'm able to allow people to open up and take that first step in their own healing by admitting what had happened to them. And I mean, it's so amazing that the different stories that I've been told. And I would tell the people when they would come up afterwards and express the heartache of what they went through, I'm like, this is so amazing. And this is the first step. It's going to be hard to go through this process, but you just took the biggest step. That first step is always the hardest. You took it. You're here. Now you're going to be able to keep pressing on. And I tell them, that the more you're able to talk about it, the more healing that you have and the more power you have over your past, and there's so much power in that. We're able to take back the story. We're able to be the author of our story and how we want people to tell it, and that's so powerful because so many people have been told, this is your story. This is how you need to share it. Now we're able to say, no, this is my story. This is how I'm going to share it. And I have the power to do with it what I want to do with it.
I love that scar scab analogy, David. I'm going to steal that from you. Hey, anybody who knows me knows I'm a huge movie buff. I'm not going to let you out of here without asking. You need to tell me all about the opportunity to work on the film Just Mercy.
Yeah, that was a definitely interesting time and just how it came about. Because in August of 2018, I get a call from Brian Stevenson. I'm up here in PA. I just graduated, so I'm at my job. And he's like, hey, do you want to be in a movie? I'm thinking, is that a question you actually have to ask somebody? It's like, just sign me up and just tell me where I need to be and what I need to do. And so he was telling me some about it. He's like, yeah, Michael B. Jordan is producing this and he's starring in it. And there's 4 incarcerated individuals in this scene, and we were going to have 4 actors do it, but I wanted 4 of my clients to play those roles. So I was one of the 4 clients that was chosen to be in this movie. And so September 2018, we all go down to Atlanta where they were filming it, and we're on set. And so we were thinking that we were going to have to look at a script and get some lines and everything. But they're like, okay, just come here, sit at this table, and we're just going to talk to you, and you just share your story. And so we each shared our story for about 18 to 20 minutes. And so the lines of ours that are in the movie are actually parts of our own story, which was really amazing and cool, because Brian Stevenson is always about changing the narrative and being proximate. And this is how he changed the narrative in this situation, where he was allowing our own stories to be part of this movie, which was unbelievable.
Well, it's been on my list. I heard it's a great film, but now it's just moved to the top of the queue. And I'm really going to watch those scenes where you're actually telling your story, David. That is really incredible insider baseball stuff there. Hey, generally speaking, what are we getting right in reintegration, and what are we getting wrong from someone who's experienced it firsthand?
Is there much that we're getting right as far as reintegration?
Okay.
I can talk more about what we're getting wrong.
There you
go. My thought process is that reentry needs to begin on day one. So when somebody's incarcerated, we need to be working with them to prepare them to get out. We have 2.1 or 2.3 million people who are incarcerated, depending on the statistics you have. And 96% of those people are going to go home. So if we have that high percentage of individuals who are going home, and we have a 65% recidivism rate, don't you think we need to do something different? And so what that is beginning to work with them on day one to prepare them to go home. We need more college level courses in these prisons. We need to have corrections officers that aren't babysitters. They need to be more involved in the day-to-day basis of the individual's life. They actually have to be educated better. There's a lot of times where some of these corrections officers are straight out of high school, and they don't know what they're doing. They lack the training that's necessary for them to be able to de-escalate a situation without putting their hands or beating somebody. And that's what is causing a lot of chaos and confusion in our prisons. So there definitely has to be a lot of changes there. I think another thing too is one thing that is great that happens here in Pennsylvania is there are reentry coalitions in over half the counties in Pennsylvania. And so these reentry coalitions are organizations that are doing reentry work. So you have the county prison involved, you have the police involved, you have the district attorneys, you have the probation parole office, you have different organizations that are working on housing, on jobs, different reentry homes. And we all come together and talk about best ways that we can help those men and women that are coming back to that county. And so I think every county in the country needs to have these type of coalitions to make it easier for those people that are coming home. And we all know the African proverb where it says it takes a village to raise a child. My spin on that is it takes a village to allow a returning citizen to be successful. And so I think that's what we need to do. We need to prepare more villages for those men and women that are coming home.
Yeah, I love that reframe. And I love the point you make about everyone, for the most part, is going to get out. So why don't we start that reentry process right on day one? If there's anything you could add to that, I was thinking I've spent a lot of years training the probation and parole officers, but I'm sort of focusing on the X's and O's. If you were to say, well, yeah, that's in the manual, but here's what you could never learn in the manual. Is there something you could, again, advice to give a well-intentioned progressive probation officer that, again, they're just not going to get in the training manual?
I'd say a lot of it with probation parole officers is don't always be so quick to violate somebody's parole. because that's what happens a lot of times. People are just like jump the gun. They don't want to see what's happening. I think a lot of what is missing in the criminal legal system and then also in probation parole is trauma-informed care. And I think that's something that would help out so many people if they really understand trauma, if they really understand that a lot of these behaviors all go back to the trauma that somebody experienced as a child and the coping mechanisms that somebody uses. And so we in America, we tend to criminalize mental health issues and we criminalize addiction. And I think that's something that if we begin to help these individuals and look at these things as diseases and situations like that, it's going to change a lot. And so I think that's going to be something where I would definitely tell probation officers and parole officers that, because that would change their job. It would make it easier. And it would also make a lot of the commitments that we have back on technical violations. Some prisons, you have 30% of the people are back on technical violations. So, I mean, over the past 30 years, crime has been going down, but the prison system has continued to stay full, if not gain more people. And so that's really what's sad about it, is that our system is a revolving door. And so what we need is probation and parole officers who are willing to put a pipe in that revolving door to shut it, where it's not going to continue to go around and take people back into prisons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could not agree more. You're doing a lot of fantastic work, David. I'll promote as much of it as I can in the show notes of the episode that we're putting together now, as far as links to anything you need in there. What's on the horizon for David Garlock? If I have you back in the show in a year, 5 years, David, what are we going to be talking about?
I am working on my memoir, so we'll definitely be talking about that. And just working on this work, trying to create parole eligibility for people with life without parole. One question I get all the time when I'm speaking in universities, they're like, if there's only one thing that you could do right now as far as the criminal legal system, what would it be? And I always say I'd cap sentences at 20 years. So that would get rid of the death penalty, that would get rid of life without parole and virtual life sentences and other lengthy sentences, because after 20 years, if somebody's not going to change, they're not going to change. And people are like, but what if they get out and go commit another? I mean, you can't really decide who's going to do that. And there's a lot of these risk assessments that are like, oh, yes, we could do this and we can do that. And another thing in that would also get rid of civil commitments, because I think that's another mechanism that states are using to just keep people incarcerated who they quote unquote fear are going to commit another offense, but there's no data, there's no science behind their beliefs or their opinions about that. And it's so sad that we're locking people up just because we think they're going to commit another offense. How can you really judge that, And at times the people that you don't think are going to commit another offense are the people that go commit another offense. It's like, but what about your risk assessment?
Somebody much wiser than me, I'm stealing this from, said we need to lock people up because we're afraid of them, not because we're mad at them. And that gets at the technical violations that you talked about, locking people up out of frustration because they didn't meet a technical requirement, or bounced out of treatment, or didn't report an address change, or something along those lines. Yeah. You mentioned capping prison sentences at 20 years. I've got an excellent book here in my office called Pervasive Punishment by a gentleman by the name of Fergus MacNeil over in Scotland. And he writes about this phenomenon of at times where we think we're being very progressive because we're steering people out of prison and putting them on probation. But then we're forgetting, well, putting somebody on probation for 20 years isn't necessarily the fix either, because to a sense, you're really setting somebody up to fail, because there's no way they can meet these expectations for that long. And as you said, if somebody's going to screw up on probation, you don't need to wait 10, 15 years to see if that's going to happen. All you're really doing is keeping this revolving door alive, because, again, you're setting up this net that was initially designed to keep people out of prison, but you had this mushrooming probation caseload that we just assumed, well, it's better than prison, but it's really not, because it's just delaying the inevitable if they go back on these technical violations. So some great thoughts there, David.
And here's something about that too. I mean, I've been on parole for 8 years, 4 months, and a day. And I mean, I have to pay supervision fee. I pay $30 a month for supervision fee. And I see my parole officer once a year. And I have to pay him for the 11 months that I don't see him. It's like, why am I paying a supervision fee if I'm not seeing my parole officer? Just like, it's baffling, it's like, that does not make sense. What is up with this situation? And so it was really interesting, and you hit it on, I mean, probation and parole are situations that mechanisms used to free people who they think are less risk to society. If we are less risk to society, how long do we have to show that we're less risk to society? So my parole is out of Alabama, but I'm in Pennsylvania and I'm on parole. I'm monitored by Pennsylvania's parole officers right now. So my agents up here, my parole agent up here in Pennsylvania, has reached out to Alabama numerous times trying to get me off parole. Alabama's not hearing it. So that's what's so baffling about it all, is like, if my offense had happened in Pennsylvania, I would have already been off parole because my parole agent had pushed for it, but since I'm not, I have to wait and rely on Alabama, and I have my pardon here papers in, and so I'm just waiting to have a pardon hearing. And so it's definitely interesting to just see the differences between two states and their parole process and how they do things.
Mm-hmm. Lots of reform work to be done. So glad we've got somebody like David Garlock out there leading that charge. David, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, and I would love to have you back in the future to learn more about your incredible journey.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to being on again.
All right, be well, David. I cannot thank David enough for sharing his incredible story for us all, and I'm looking forward to having him back to talk about his memoirs. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about David, you can certainly do so by visiting his website, which is simply davidgarlock.com, D-A-V-I-D, David Garlock, G-A-R-L-O-C-K, davidgarlock.com. You can learn how to book David for a speaking event. There's also some cool links to other resources out there regarding David and his work, up to and including some publications and articles featured in the Dallas Morning News, the Christian Post, and the Forgive Everyone Collective. David has also appeared on other podcasts, including the I'm Curious with Ashley Osti podcast, the Registry Report podcast, and the Amplified Voices podcast. Again, all that can be found at David's website, davidgarlock.com. You can also learn how to follow David on Facebook and Twitter, which I am now doing as well. Of course, we'll leave that link in the show notes of this podcast episode for you to please check out. Back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, theparagongroup.llc.com, for training or presentations as to evidence-based practices or implementation, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and our Instagram page at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow. You can also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. Merchandise is now available. Reach out if interested. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us, ask them to subscribe to the show, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
The first time I visited death row, I wasn't expecting to meet somebody the same age as me. From a neighborhood just like ours.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.
The thoughts, statements, and opinions of the host and cast members do not necessarily reflect the views of their employers and are those of the host and cast themselves. Any discussion regarding client statements, behaviors, actions, or crimes are purely fictional and are used only for the purposes of example. Any examples that could be deemed to be related to an actual individual or individuals are incidental.